Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. The new regime was a cold and efficient one. Leo was a natural at the game. He had his father's mind, but he had none of his father's conscience. He ran the operation with a ruthless and pragmatic precision. The money flowed, the power grew, and Bishop, the old king, was pleased. He had found a worthy heir. Michael was a man adrift in the sea of his own making. He was a guard in a prison where his own son was a shot caller. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a world that no longer had a place for him. He tried to talk to Leo to reach him, but his son was a stone wall, his eyes two chips of ice. "You made your choice, old man," Leo told him once. "You chose to be a god. I chose to be a king. We're on different sides of the board now." The guilt of what he had done to Sarah, the female CEO, was a constant and gnawing presence. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when he walked by. He had not just used her, he had broken her. He had turned her into a criminal, a puppet in his own and selfish drama. And now she was a puppet for his son. Michael was a man at the bottom of a deep and dark hole. He had lost his son, he had lost his soul, he had nothing left to lose, and in that he found a strange and unexpected kind of courage. He was going to burn it all down. He went to the one place he had spent his whole and second life avoiding, the warden's office. He sat across from the man who was his boss, his ultimate authority, and he confessed to everything: the drugs, the phones, Bishop, Sarah, and his son, Leo. He laid out the entire and sordid history of the family business. He was not just a snitch. He was a kamikaze. He was taking the whole ship down with him. The warden listened, his face a mask of a grave, in weary disbelief. He had known Michael for years. He had thought he was a good and decent man. And now he was listening to the confession of a monster who had been hiding in plain sight. The investigation was swift and brutal. The feds were called in. They came in with a force that the prison had never seen before. They tore the place apart. They found the drugs, the phones, the paper trails. They arrested Bishop, they arrested Sarah, and they arrested Leo. The prince of the prison led away in chains, his face a mask of a pure and absolute disbelief. He looked at his father, who was standing there in the hallway, a ghost in a blue uniform watching it all unfold. And in that one final look, he understood. His father, the man he had cast aside, had been the one to bring his kingdom crashing down. The final and most devastating move in a game that had no winners, only losers. The federal indictments came down like a hammer. Bishop, Leo, Sarah, and a dozen other inmates and guards were all charged in a massive RICO case. And the star witness, the man who had built the case for them, was Michael. He was no longer Officer Miller. He was a cooperating witness, a man in a different kind of cage now, a cage of protective custody, waiting to testify against his own son. The trial was a media circus. The story of the father, the son, and the prison drug empire was a story that was too good, too tragic to resist. Michael took the stand, and in a quiet and steady voice, he told the truth, the whole and ugly truth. He didn't spare himself. He laid out his own sins, his own weakness, his own manipulation. He was a man laying his own and broken, soul bare for the world to see. When he spoke of his son, Leo, his voice cracked for the first time. He looked at the boy he had once tried so hard to protect, and he saw a stranger, a cold and hard product of the very system he had helped to create. "I did it all for him," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "And in the end, I was the one who destroyed him." Leo just stared at him, his face a mask of a cold and unforgiving hatred. He saw his father not as a tragic figure, but as a traitor, a man who had once again chosen the system over his own blood. The jury found them all guilty. Bishop got life. Leo got 30 years. Sarah, for her cooperation, got 10. And Michael, for his, was sentenced to time served and released into the witness protection program. He walked out of that courtroom a free man. But he was a ghost. A man with a new name, a new life, and a past that would forever haunt him. He had done the right thing in the end. He had brought a criminal enterprise to its knees. But he had also sent his own son to a cage for the rest of his life. He had saved his soul, but he had lost his son. And he knew with a certainty that was its own and final life sentence that he would be paying for that choice for the rest of his days. Life in the witness protection program is a quiet and lonely kind of hell. Michael had a small apartment in a town he didn't know, a job at a factory, a new name that felt like a lie. He was free, but he was a prisoner of his own in constant regret. He thought about Leo every day. He imagined him in his cell, a young man growing old in a cage, his heart filled with a cold and patient hatred for the father who had put him there. Michael wrote to him long and rambling letters of apology, of explanation. They all came back unopened. The door was closed. Forever. He heard about Sarah sometimes through his contact in the Marshal Service. She was in a low-security facility doing her time trying to piece her own and shattered life back together. The guilt of what he had done to her, of how he had used her lonely heart as a tool in his own in tragic drama, was a heavy and constant weight on his soul. He was a man adrift, a ghost in his own life. He had tried to be a father, and he had failed. He had tried to be a good man, and he had failed. He had lived a life of secrets, of lies, of a quiet and desperate compromise. And in the end, it had all come to this: a lonely room in a lonely town with nothing but the ghosts of his own choices for company. And this story, the story of the family business inside, it's a tragedy in the truest sense of the word. A story of a good man who, in his desperate and misguided love for his son, became a monster. And of a son who, in his own and righteous anger, became a reflection of the very thing he hated. It's a story that shows you that the road to hell is often paved with the best of intentions, and that the most dangerous cages are not the ones with bars, but the ones we build for ourselves, out of love, out of fear, and out of a quiet and desperate hope for a salvation that will never come. The final chapter of this story is a quiet one. Michael lived out the rest of his days in that small, anonymous town. He never remarried. He never had another family. He was a ghost, a man who had outlived his own life. He died an old man alone in his apartment, his last thought, a quiet and whispered apology to the son he had lost and the man he had never been. And Leo, he grew old in his cage. The fire of his anger cooled over the years, leaving only a cold and empty ash. He became a quiet and solitary inmate, a man who had been betrayed by everyone he had ever trusted, his father, his mentor, the system. He was a man who had been born in a cage of circumstance and who would die in a cage of concrete and steel. The cycle was complete. In this story, it's a warning about the seductive and dangerous nature of a father's love, a love that can be a shield and a sword, a love that can protect and a love that can destroy. Michael had thought he was protecting his son, but he was just teaching him the rules of a game that no one ever wins. It's a reminder that the prison system doesn't just cage the guilty, it cages the innocent too. The families, the children, the ones who are left on the outside to live with the wreckage. They are the silent and forgotten victims of this endless and brutal war. And it's a question. What does it mean to be a good father? Is it to protect your child from the world? Or is it to prepare them to face it? Michael had chosen the first. And in doing so, he had left his son completely and tragically unprepared for the brutal realities of a world that does not care about a father's love, a world that only cares about the choices you make and the price you are willing to pay for them. And so we come to the end of the story of the family business inside. A story that shows you that the most dangerous contraband a man can smuggle into a prison is not a drug or a weapon. It's hope, a false hope, a hope that you can cheat the system, that you can save the ones you love, that you can be a father in a place that is designed to strip you of your own humanity. Michael was a man who was drowning in that false hope. He had thought he could be two men at once, the good God and the good father. But in the end, he had been neither. He had been a criminal and a monster, a man who had used his own son as a pawn in a game that was far bigger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And Leo, he was the tragic and inevitable result of his father's choices. He was a boy who had been raised in a cage, first by his father's absence and then by his father's protection. He had never been allowed to be his own man. And when he finally tried to be, the only model he had was the one his father and Bishop had shown him, a model of a cold and ruthless and ultimately empty power. Their story is a Greek tragedy played out on the concrete stage of a state penitentiary. A story of a father who, in trying to save his son from his fate, only ended up leading him to it. It's a reminder that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that in a world as broken as this one, sometimes the most loving thing a father can do for his son is to simply let him go. Let him find his own way. Let him make his own mistakes, and let him become his own man. A lesson that Michael learned all too well and all too late. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.
I'm getting so tired.